social sector. The Amit Mehta Tech Talks, which is the second track, touches upon innovation, technology, and disruption in the social sector. The BASIX Sub-K Samvad is a combined effort of BASIX Social Enterprise Group and Sub-K. The BASIX Social Enterprise Group is a pioneer in promoting livelihoods. It was founded by Mr. Vijay Mahajan in the year 1996. The BASIX Group has since grown and evolved under his leadership and guidance and is now a huge group of 9 entities working in financial inclusion, skill development, consulting, waste management, and a multitude of others. Sub-K is a corporate banking correspondent that offers affordable, accessible, scalable financial solutions to the underserved segments. At Sub-K, we strive to bridge the digital divide for creating a financially included society. Without further ado, I would like to call upon Mr. Sasidhar, CEO and MD of Sub-K Impact Solutions, and our moderator for today's session. Our session today would be on employment and growth in the time of COVID-19. Request the viewers to post their questions in the chat boxes. We will be collecting these questions and posing the same to Vijay Mahajan sir at the end for about 10 to 15 minutes. Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Anish, and good afternoon, everyone. Good morning as well for those who are joining from other parts of the world. It's really an honor to be hosting this event. And this is an inaugural session of the long series that we hope to continue to hold. So let me take this opportunity to introduce the inaugural speaker for the event, Mr. Vijay Mahajan. Vijay Mahajan needs no introduction, and most of you are very much familiar with his name. How much ever I try, I would not be able to do justice. Nevertheless, I will try for the benefit of those who are not very familiar with him. He goes by the first name Vijay among his colleagues, friends, and peers. Some of us fondly call him VM. I consider myself extremely fortunate to have been mentored by VM since the very early time in my career. Like me, many professionals owe their careers in social sector to VM's guidance and inspiration. A very pragmatic and down-to-earth personality, he's always ready to help out anyone and everyone, be it an office boy or a startup entrepreneur or a finance minister. He embodies a selfless individual who genuinely is dedicated his entire professional life to thinking, practicing, and advocating for the welfare of the underprivileged, a true embodiment of an entrepreneur with a big heart. After graduating from IIT, VM worked for Philips India, post which he joined IIM Ahmedabad. He got exposed to the realities of rural India during his work with Philips and through development work undertaken under his professors in IIM Ahmedabad. After graduating from IIM, he decided to devote his life to work for the upliftment of India's poor. In 1982, he joined a Gandhian NGO, Asifa in Bihar. In 1983, VM founded Pradhan. Pradhan is an NGO which deploys professionals in the development work. Pradhan has since then worked with over 1 million poor households, mainly in tribal areas of India. In search of more sustainable model, VM moved on from Pradhan in 1991. He went on to study economic development policy at Princeton University, USA. After 5 years of his development research and advisory work, VM founded BASIX Social Enterprise Group in 1996. It became a pioneer in financial inclusion and has supported livelihoods of over 5 million poor households in India and continues to do so. BASIX also worked in 9 of the least developed countries. VM retired from BASIX in 2016 after 20 years of his service to the group. Though a development practitioner all his life, VM has remained active in writing and policy discourse. He served on the Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority of India, the Nagarajan Committee of Financial Inclusion, Raghuram Rajan Committee of Financial Sector Reforms, and several working groups of 11th and 12th 5-year plans. Internationally, he served as a co-chair of Global Advisory Council for Social Entrepreneurship of World Economic Forum Davos, and as a chair of World Bank's consultative group to assist the poor. VM was named among 60 outstanding social entrepreneurs of the world at the World Economic Forum Davos in 2003. He was selected as a distinguished alumnus of IIT Delhi, a distinguished alumnus at IIM Ahmedabad, and Ashoka Global Fellow. He was also invited to be a resident fellow at Rockefeller Center, Bellagio, Italy in 2017. In 2018, VM took over as CEO of Rajiv Gandhi Foundation and the director of Rajiv Gandhi Institute for Contemporary Studies, and is currently based in Delhi. It is indeed an honor to have a conversation with him today. We have more than 500 viewers on this channel and an equal number in Facebook Live watching this show as we speak. This is a testimony of the popularity of today's illustrious speaker and the topic we chose for today. Before we move to the topic, may I request VM to say a few words on Mr. Nagarajan and Mr. Amit Mehta, on whose memory we are holding this series of talks of knowledge exchange. VM, over to you.
Thank you, Shashi. First of all, thank you, Sub-K and the BASIX Group for organizing this series of conversations and for asking me to be the first speaker. It's also very touching and very appropriate that you're doing this in the memory of Mr. V Nagarajan, who's been my lifelong friend, professional friend. I knew him since 1980s. Of course, his smallest description is that he was a chartered accountant and auditor of the BASIX Group. But he actually, if there was any such thing as a Lifetime Achievement Award for contribution to the microfinance sector, I would name Nagarajan to be one of the recipients because of his contribution, not just to BASIX at the foundation stage, but indeed to almost every single microfinance institution, and many of them have now become small finance banks, and one of them, Bandhan, is actually now a full-fledged bank. So Mr. Nagarajan was not just a great professional friend of all these institutions, but he became personally very supportive of many of the founder entrepreneurs. And certainly for me, his going last year was a big loss. So this is a very good way that we are remembering him. And indeed, I'm very happy that there'll be a whole series of events, Shashi, on on finance and financial inclusion and on all related matters in the memory of Mr. Nagarajan. The founder or co-founder of Sub-K, Amit Mehta, also we lost over a year ago at a very young age, suddenly. And Amit and we met over more than 10 years ago in Hyderabad, and that was the time when BASIX had just about finished doing some pilot projects on financial inclusion, and I realized that unless we could master the technology, we could not really go forward in big numbers. And Amit in those days used to be head of mobile value-added services for Tata Consulting Services, TCS. And he took on that task just as a sort of, as a way to help me. But then he got so involved that I rather hesitatingly suggested to him that why doesn't he and a few of his colleagues who had also got excited by the idea join me in a startup which later became Sub-K. So Amit, in that sense, is the person who brought the idea to fruition, and it's so appropriate, Shashi, that we are remembering him and also starting as another talk series in the field of financial technologies or technology in general applied to the field of development. So these are both wonderful things, and I'd like to pay my tributes to both of them. And I hope that Sharda Nagarajan is watching this, and Meenakshi Mehta is watching this, and also Amit's parents, Mr. R.K. Mehta and Mr. Mehta, are also watching this right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. No one else could have shared more fond memories than you, having worked with them so closely in building these institutions. And just to remind the audience, we are running 2 tracks in memory of each of them related to their own areas of expertise. One is on technology and innovation, which Amit embodies. Another is governance, regulation, finance, investments track, which Nagarajan, very broad spectrum of expertise that he demonstrated. and as a true architect of the industry, the social sector in general. So thank you, VM. We have chosen this topic today as a kickoff for BASIX Sub-K Samvad, as we thought it is quite pertinent for current times, and that our future is linked to this very issue of employment and growth. All of us are wondering how the world is going to shape up after the dust settles. So VM, as you and all of us are watching, the virus refuses to slow down. We have crossed 8 lakh infections and soon we'll be in the million club. Industrial production is down. As we speak today, is 35% still. Unemployment rates have skyrocketed. They're getting better. The world has practically come to a standstill. Economists predict 4 to 5% deceleration in the economy. And there are debates on how the economy will recover. As we begin the signs of recovery, there are also now news coming of new lockdowns, of course, maybe in restricted geographies. In the light of these developments, could you please help us understand what the employment situation was before COVID? How has it got impacted due to lockdown? And what do you see happening going forward?
Thank you, Shashi. While COVID is truly a global problem, but I will confine my comments to India, which is big enough, as you know. Population mid 2020 will be already there. It's 133 crores, despite the fact that we've had a reducing labor force participation rate, that is persons who are willing and able to work divided by total population. As per the data of the periodic labor force survey 2017-18, which came out actually in 2019, there were the labor force participation rate was 36%, which applied to today's population number comes to 48 crore persons working or seeking work. This was, of course, say a pre-COVID situation, and even among them, there was not complete employment. So what's called the worker population, that is those persons who are actually working, was lower at 34.7%. So about 46.1 crore persons were working in India pre-COVID. Of that, about 22 crores were working in agriculture and related activities, about 10 crores farmers, cultivators, 12 crores as agriculture and allied workers. Another 20 odd crore were employed in the rural non-farm sector and the urban informal sector, mostly in construction services. And what we call employment jobs, formal sector jobs, actually accounted for a minuscule 3.7 crore, 37 million people in the entire country. And many of them, by the way, were casual workers. The pre-COVID unemployment rate was between 8 to 9%. So that's about 4 crore people were basically looking for work even before COVID started. Now, that situation has changed most dramatically between March and now. The situation had peaked to a point where in May, the early data showed that the unemployment rate had gone up to nearly 23%, or about 11 crore people. So an additional 7 crore persons became jobless. And that was, I think, the peak. The most recent data for June is more heartening. Unemployment rate seems to have come down to 11%, although it's hard to know how well it was measured and how come it was so quickly measured. But if we take those numbers at face value, it comes to about 5.3 crore persons unemployed. My own estimate is that this is probably an underestimate. We will know the real numbers only in a month or two. But the fact is that we're talking of tens of millions of people, crores of people who are unemployed. Some of them are structurally unemployed before COVID, and many got added afterwards. And within all of this, of course, all of us saw the great human exodus of, nobody knows the exact numbers, but somewhere between 2 to 3 crore people migrating back from urban areas to their native villages. Many of them walking, many of them hitching rides on whatever they could get. And so the nation's attention, quite rightly, got focused on the plight of the migrant workers. But even if we assume that, there were about, say, 2.5 crores who went back, that is only 10% of the workforce in rural areas that was already there, about 27 crores. And therefore, while it's important that we pay attention to the structural causes of the tragedy that happened due to reverse migration, the bigger issue is that rural India has more people than it can generate livelihoods for. And that's what leads to rural to urban migration. And indeed, even as we talk, there are news items that all trains out of Bihar are fully booked. And people are, in fact, in some cases, people are even starting to walk back to their urban workplaces. So that's ample evidence that while people went home to seek safety, security, and be with their loved ones, and the situation was truly desperate, but now they're back to looking for livelihoods, and they seem to be needing to come back to urban areas. May not be that all will not come back, but still, significant number will come back.
So what are the segments that you think have been majorly impacted, other than, of course, migrants are the big news item, but then I'm sure there is a lot of informal economy that got disturbed. And what are the segments that we are seeing that have been impacted in this process?
So, right now, in the absence of naturally any aggregate nationwide data, we have to go by surveys. And one of the most comprehensive survey aggregation that has been done by the Azim Premji University, which established a dashboard called ICARD, India COVID Assessment and Response Dashboard. That is also their website, by the way, www.i-card.org. And they are collecting data from nearly 400 blocks all over India, but mostly spread in the heartland India, from where a lot of the migrant workers came from. And they collect data on a number of things, health, education, the status of public services, the status of Narega, and livelihoods. And the situation, of course, varies a lot from place to place, but on livelihoods, and their dashboard is color coded, so you don't have to look too much at numbers. It goes all the way from dark green to dark red or dark orange, and the display for livelihoods is the one that really, as you can see, is completely orange or red, and that's really the area which is most worrisome. The things that are actually working reasonably well, and this is, by the way, ground reports from 400 different NGOs who are working in those areas, so they have no reason to toe the official line. The good news is that, broadly speaking, in the assessment of those NGOs, the public distribution system is working reasonably well. The healthcare system is working. I mean, despite all the the COVID-related stress on tertiary facilities, things are reasonably okay. This is the Narega system is not uniformly working well, but it's at least beginning to take off. But when it comes to livelihoods, that's where the problem is. And in terms of segments, the question that you asked, if you just go to the next slide, please. sorry, the left side is not very clear, but the first row is agricultural labor and migrant farmers. You'll find that it's kind of a light orange. But the next two are craft workers, self-employed workers, and non-agricultural laborers. So these next three are completely, and non-agricultural labor are completely red, of course, and the other two, craft workers and self-employed, are slightly better off, but they are also in the red zone. Below that is those who are getting Manrega work pre-COVID, and now whether they're getting comparable Manrega work. It's slightly lower than it was pre-COVID, but it's not in the red zone. So, you know, while it's been a huge crisis, I think we must also remember that some things have worked, and they worked because they were put in place over decades, you know, whether it is the district administration, or if you know, since there are a lot of people from the financial and technical sector, you know, the fact that the banking system worked, the remittances system worked, the internet and the IT systems worked, the core banking system worked, you know, it's quite amazing, you know, in the midst of this crisis. And imagine what would have happened if any of these systems, for example, you know, we are having a Zoom call right now, if the telecom system didn't work, you know, what chaos it would have been. So we should also count our blessings that some systems have worked and everything is not chaotic, and build from there onwards with hope and with a clear-eyed situation. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's true. In fact, you know, many of us on this talk, who are the audience, also may testify. Some of their businesses, they try to sort of manage the show, and especially when, you know, business correspondents that we manage, they continue to operate despite the risks, despite the situation, because technology worked, and you know, citizens were able to withdraw their cash benefits that they were receiving, much needed money that was required.
Yeah.
But now, given that context, you know, how do you see, you know, private sector, maybe financial institutions specifically, but private sector in general, playing a role in helping the recovery, the revival?
You know, Shashi, so we have a very interesting situation where, in a sense, as I said, over decades, very large systems have been built in a relatively developing economy, still an economy full of a lot of poor people. But we do have very large systems, which what happens is they fail in the last mile in some ways. They fail not because the overall system is not working, but because, you know, at the last mile, or what in Sub-K days we used to say, it's not the last mile that matters, it's the first smile that matters. By first smile, we meant the hand-holding support that people need, even to use a mobile phone, for example, in the earlier days, or to go into a, you know, an outlet and conduct a banking transaction. It's all about exposure, self-confidence, and so on. So today, while we have all these systems, like, you know, we have a huge public distribution system, over, I think nearly over 20 crore ration cards, covering 80 crore people. You know, and most of them are Aadhaar linked, seeded. But if you don't have a ration card, or for any reason it didn't get renewed, in theory, there are lots of ways by you can do it, but in practice, it's very hard. So, you know, so I just want to show, and I'm not going to click on the YouTube links, but when this presentation is circulated later, people can click on these links and you'll see that lots of people have jumped into the fray. There is this site which helps people to register for ration cards, you know, the new One Nation, One Ration card, which will enable migrant workers, for example, to draw rations wherever they are. It was a much needed reform that was actually brought in place about a few months before COVID. There's this whole issue of how do you get a job card of Narega. You know, you can't, even if Narega work opens in your village, you can't enroll in it unless you have a job card. And getting that job card made is again possible using your mobile phone, at least applying for it is possible. But how to do it? So again, there is this YouTube video. There is an organization called Hak Darshak, which in fact is a one-stop shop for all kinds of government schemes. They have, I think, parsed all the national and state websites for about a few thousand government schemes. And by asking you a few questions like your age, do you have any disability, your caste, your education level, your income level, they then tell you, okay, the following 12 schemes you are eligible for. And then you can go to the next level where you can apply for those electronically in most cases. So, these are all examples of private sector initiatives, often actually individuals or very small company initiatives, where they are using, you might say, the overall large public systems and trying to fill that last mile or the first mile gap, which was very important, which we did in Sub-K for financial inclusion several years ago.
Yeah, so these are great. I mean, we'll get back again to more in terms of what technology can, for specifically, I think, enable it. That's the future in a lot of ways, and these problems are probably better solved. But before that, you painted this picture of how the livelihoods of certain specific segments got seriously impacted, and I think those are the areas where the focus should more go. So, what do you see? How do you envisage addressing the revival of livelihoods, employment growth in the vulnerable segments?
Yeah, so Shashi, first of all, I think it's very important that we, while recognizing the size of this crisis, we retain hope. And that's why I keep coming up with these other happy, my pansha for coming out with acronyms. So I have this well done framework so that we can, all feel a bit cheerful. It's a bit of a PJ, but nevertheless, so first of all, I maintain that rural India is the one that's going to lead the recovery process. I mean, you already mentioned that, the virus is not halting, and indeed many urban areas are dotted with, all kinds of restrictions on movement, containment zones, and quarantine requirements and all of that. And as a result, the supply chain for inputs and the supply chain for outputs of physical manufacturing industries is still very, very disrupted, apart from the fact that many workers are not in place. But in rural India, where agriculture is the most important livelihood, what is amazing is that neither the supply side got affected, because we had a bountiful Rabi harvest. The procurement in Punjab was almost like normal, the Rabi wheat crop. And the logistics system, the Indian Railways, though we think the trains have shut down, actually they've been working double speed on goods movement. So the agriculture sector's supply side has remained intact, and now fortunately we also have a good monsoon. So as a result of that, we find that supply side is fine. Now on the demand side, even when income has fallen, even if you're poor, you have to eat something. And if you can't afford it, there's a public distribution system which has to acquire that, and it was not just cereals, but they're now also giving pulses and some oil and many other things. So the demand side has remained pretty robust for agriculture products. Likewise, things like fresh vegetables, fruits, dairy, to some extent poultry, although there's been some backlash about COVID rumors about poultry and other non-veg food. But by and large, the demand side has remained fine. So the question is, what can we do to further enhance the revival? And here, actually, I'm saying, let's not waste this crisis. Let's turn it into an opportunity. For the last 3 years, I've been saying, I've written a number of articles saying that rural India's productive resource base, which is basically Jal, Jangal, Zameen in Hindi, water, forests, and land includes soil, that resource base has got very badly degraded over the last 50 to 70 years. We need to invest in them. For example, we have between 40 to 60 million hectares of rain-fed agriculture, depending on how you count. So let's just take the round figure of 50 million hectares. Now, there are n number of projects, thousands of projects. I know hundreds myself. I've worked on maybe 10, 20 of them. I've visited a few hundred, and there are thousands where it has been demonstrated that simple rainwater harvesting structures like farm ponds or small water harvesting structures can significantly reduce the runoff, improve the subsoil moisture, and then the slow release of water into rivulets and then eventually into streams and rivers, and also recharge the groundwater aquifers. So if you want to draw water from bore wells, you can get that. But the key to all of that is rainwater harvesting. And if in this 50 million hectares of our rain-fed area, if we took a national resolve that we shall ensure that every drop that falls on those 50 million hectares is captured, and is allowed not to run off, but slowly seep in or stored on surface structures. Now, the average cost of that is hardly about, it varies from 20 to 50,000 rupees per hectare, depending on the difficulty of the terrain. Let's say 40,000 to be on the higher side. So we're talking of 5 crores into 40,000, that is 2 lakh crore of expenditure to make rain-fed India into nearly drought-proof India. And apart from other ecological benefits that happen when you do full-fledged watershed management. Now, 2 lakh crores, is it big or is it small? Well, it's 1% of the GDP. As it is this year alone, the NREGA budget, which was originally 61,000 crores, has now been raised to 1 lakh crores. And there's a further 50,000 crores that has been announced under a similar scheme. So 1 lakh 50 has already been allocated. If we ensure that that is used wisely, and most of it is used for water conservation structures, we could actually be very close to this dream. Likewise, let me move on to the next important thing, which is energy is very important, because even if you have water under the ground, you need electrical energy to lift it for pumping. You need electrical engineering energy for many other applications, things like what I call filling, milling, drilling, all kinds of applications require electrical energy. And those days are gone when we had to generate power in Singrauli and send it to all of the country with 2,000 kilometer long transmission lines. We can now do it on rooftop solar in every village, or microgrids in every village. In BASIX, we had built a microgrid in Bihar way back 10 years ago. And in fact, Amit was involved with that also with me. It was financed by an international organization. And so things like this are very important for capturing the solar energy that's coming free to India and to convert it into a very productive asset, which will also then, as rural India goes from agriculture to non-farm to processing, so from not just for using for irrigation, but tomorrow if you want to do cold storages, then it can be used for that. Some small scale processing, food processing, it can be used for that, and so forth. Then in the well framework, W and E I've covered. Land is really the next thing. Partly I talked about land while talking about rainwater harvesting, but that was more about how water helps land. But the land itself requires some investments, because we have finished off our soil fertility. Punjab's soil is almost dead. The microbial life is dead because of over-fertilization. Even in the dryland areas, the soil requires some additional humus. And so if we can get that small investment of about 5 to 10,000 rupees per hectare in soil amendments, then we actually, that 50 million hectares or 5 crore hectares that I talked about in dryland areas, and maybe another 10, 20 crore, 10, 20 million hectares in the irrigated areas. We're talking about 7 crore hectares, which can be treated for improving its productivity. Now, the interesting thing is that all of this requires almost 100% of the labor that's required is unskilled. Maybe for every 100 people who are working, you need maybe 2 or 3 supervisors. And for every 1,000 who are working, you might require a design engineer at the back. And maybe for every 10,000 who are working, you might require a senior administrator. So we have a unique situation where we have crores of people looking for work. We have crores of hectares of land looking for improvement and investment. And we have a very large government program called NREGA, which actually has a full-fledged system to enable this. So once again, the big system is in place. It is the micro fixing at the level of every village, that needs to be done. And I think there's a lot of role there. I want to just take 30 seconds on the second L in well, which is livestock. And it's partly because, agricultural economy, particularly in dryland areas, is not enough to generate income and not enough to generate steady cash flows. So things like dairy, poultry, fishery, even honey beekeeping are very important supplementary occupations. But there's another very important role of livestock, which is that the dung, cow dung or gobar, is very, very useful for improving the land. Really speaking, we don't need anything more than the cow dung or indeed buffalo dung or goat droppings to improve our land. So between these 4, all of which are possible and within reach, where the experience of running these activities is with our people, we have the solutions. We need a national will and administrative fiat and lots of participation by NGOs and people's organizations to make this happen. And we can do this in just 2 years. And we'd have a much stronger rural economy, which has also been climate proofed, which also helps improve the environment, and which is providing livelihoods on a steady basis to people long after the NREGA work is over. So this is as far as the well part is concerned. You may be wondering what about the done? So one of the big issues in rural India, Shashi, is that too many people are working in agriculture. If you ask me what is the best thing we can do to help Indian agriculture, it is to help about half the people who are working in Indian agriculture to move out of agriculture. But as China did, their slogan in 1979 was leave the farm, but not the village. So what were they supposed to do? How can you leave the farm and not the village? Well, China set up lakhs and lakhs of what are called in those days TVEs, Township and Village Enterprises. Township is like a block headquarter. And that period between 1979 to 1989 was when China trained its rural workforce to move from being farmers or agricultural workers to non-farm workers. They learned skills and a new generation came up. And then post 90, when China's eastern seaboard took off and became an export engine for the whole world, it was because of this experience. It's not as if one day China was all communes growing agriculture, and then next day Deng Xiaoping said, okay, now we'll become a global workforce. No. It took 15 years. And there was a very systematic process. So that process is missing. And so the done part of what I'm talking about is really for that. And the D in done stands for digital. And that, if you can just put on that slide, please. I just want to. the done slide. Yeah. Yeah. So D is digital. Everybody, India is a nation where half the population is now below 30. Nobody should, in that age group should be left, digitally illiterate. I mean, people have done a lot to learn how to use cell phones and, how to use apps and, how to download and how to use WhatsApp and all these other things. But a more systematic use of digital skilling for employment and productivity is really what I'm arguing for. Of course, Shashi, this is a day when I feel so happy and proud that the work that Amit and rest of the Sub-K team did. We were the pioneers in financial inclusion. I still remember Nandan Nilekani, 2 years before he became UID chief. He had come to visit our business correspondent outlet between Mehboob Nagar and a place nearby Jadcharla. And it was only about 20 kilometers away. And, we showed him how remote transactions were happening. There were no cell phones those days. Within 2 years, we were doing those transactions between East Delhi and Muzaffarpur, Bihar for remittances. And another 2 years, the banking system had wired up and had, the whole concept of core banking system reaching even rural branches had started. So today we have a fantastic, possibility of financial inclusion. And then, of course, the Jan Dhan program and so on ensured that almost everybody got a bank account. There are all kinds of issues with that. I'm not romanticizing. There are issues of dormant accounts. There are issues of, the signal failing or the Aadhaar thing not working and so forth. But those are operational problems. The big system has been built. The next big thing that we need to do, and COVID is the time when we need to do it, is some beginning has been made, both in digital education and in telemedicine. I know kids who are listening to this, if they are, they'll be fed up saying they're already spending too much time on their computers, getting classes. But when situation normalizes, imagine how much access we would have enhanced to education from anywhere else in the world, plus entertainment, by using the digital means. So, in a sense, COVID has forced us to explore this new dimension, and we should use it. Likewise for medicine, a lot of it can be done at a distance, telemedicine. Today, of course, everybody is thinking of health as COVID nahi lagna chahiye, but there are the standard problems of health will remain for a long time to come, and they can be handled through a combination of telemedicine and our nationwide network of ASHA workers. The O is organizing. Organizing is very essential because individual rural farmers, non-farm workers, women, micro entrepreneurs, healthcare workers, education workers, and in urban areas, informal sector workers, they all need to get together in informal or formal groups. Ideally, first informal and then slowly at a higher level federating like self-help groups do. Because then, A, they get a sense of solidarity, B, they get a sense of collective strength, they become traceable, they become significant, they become customers rather than just supplicants. And as the banking system has shown, the first self-help groups in India were in the 1990s. And now there are 1 crore self-help groups in the country. 50 lakh of them are linked with banks, So we have that amazing ability to organize the disorganized. There's a lot of talk these days about let's formalize the informal. I think formalizing the informal represents a particular mindset. Before formalizing, we need to organize, because once people are organized, then they can actually get the benefit of formalization. Without organizing, if you formalize them, they still remain just helpless, atomized supplicants. Instead of a nasty lower level official facing them, there's a unhelpful digital interface facing them. That's all. That's the only change. So organizing is very important. the N is for non-farm, and basically I've made this point, so I won't spend too much time on it, that rural India needs to diversify from agriculture to agro and horti processing. We have a huge handloom and handicrafts tradition that needs to be built again. Rural construction is very, very important, housing and small infrastructure. And of course, when all this happens, then trade, transport, some form of travel. These days, travel sounds like difficult in COVID, but normalcy will return, business and social services. These are major employers. Do we know, for example, that just the civil society sector, the NGO sector in India, employs 2.2 crore workers and has another 2 crore volunteers, over 4 crore people who are in social services sector outside of the government, so these are huge employers. And finally, the E stands for e-commerce, and e-commerce has three components. One is, as I say, EFG, E is electronically displaying your wares. F is then getting the money through financial channels, when you book the orders, some advance, or when you deliver the goods, some, the payment. And G is the goods, the actual logistics, because things have to be taken out, except maybe for services like BPOs and so on. So all the three parts of e-commerce need to move into rural India. We had, again, as you know, in the BASIX group, made an attempt through a company called Connect India. Its footprint in rural India is not as strong as I would have liked it to be. But basically, if we empower rural India through these four methods, make them diversify into the non-farm sector, give them digital empowerment, organizing them, and link them with markets outside world with e-commerce, I don't see why large number of villagers have to come to urban areas at terrible cost to themselves.
Well done, Liam. So this is, I think, makes full sense, and it's bringing with hope, as you said, very forward-looking. It all starts with the name, and I think we are kind of putting all that together makes a lot of sense. So you're basically saying that there are railroads that are being laid. There is an opportunity that one can find because of the resources that are out there, whether it's human, land, water, natural. And you also alluded to the fact that there are now opportunities that we can exploit through technology, digital. Very quickly, Liam, before we open it up for more questions, what are that we are seeing in terms of how technology is being leveraged to capture some of these opportunities that we're talking here?
Yeah, so Shashi, without singing the Sub-K song once more, but just as an example, see, India had a very large banking system, and it was nationalized. And then even private sector banks came up from the 90s onwards, ICICI Bank, HDFC Bank, and so forth. But the access of the poor to financial services, to credit, and even to saving services remained poor till microfinance came in, right? And then subsequently on the saving side, the business correspondent model, the Sub-K type of work came in. Now, what is the value added by microfinance or by business correspondent service? It is what we call the last mile, or I prefer to call the first smile, the helping the excluded customer to be welcomed into using this fantastic large system that has been created. India's financial sector is not just for South Bombay or South Delhi walas. India's financial sector is for people who live in Arunachal Pradesh, people who live in Kashmir, people who live in, Tamil Nadu and so forth. So, and, the digital infrastructure and the spread of digital literacy is a great enabler. So let me just quickly walk you through a few slides, which show some examples. I'll just, as they're shown, I'll talk about them. So, for example, I talked about the well activities. So there is, there are sites which help you design water conservation structures under MNREGA. There are sites which help you install solar PV solar power systems and the devices thereon. IFCO has a IFCO Kisan website for land-based activities, cultivation, and so on. There are livestock-based apps. Goat Gyan is just one example, but there are many. And on the done side, go ahead. Of course, there are n number of digital literacy apps, but Dhan Gyan, since one of the things that I was involved with, self-help group apps like Sahbagi, non-farm sector apps, Furti, e-commerce apps, so many of them. Then go ahead next. Then, at the same time, recognizing the fact that everybody is not going to settle down in rural areas just because they went back in the time of distress. Many of them want to come back. So Rajasthan government has established this portal called Raj Kaushal. Sorry, the J is looking cut in this. It is Raj Kaushal and government of Rajasthan, where, it's a matchmaking site. It's like, Naukri.com, but for specific, for the lower end, for the informal sector, and so forth. And many other private apps have come up. Next. Recently, the 5,000 crores was earmarked out of that 20 lakh crore package for street vendors. And there's a new loan called Swanidhi, Street Vendors Atmanirbhar Nidhi. And there is already a portal through which people can, MFIs can link with banks, and individuals can apply for Swanidhi loans. Go ahead, next. Then, the GST is again a huge piece of, it's a data treasure, and as people sort of become more and more GST friendly, getting the larger part of micro enterprises, the ones which are GST registered, typically, which means that they have a turnover of 4-5 lakhs a month, getting them onboarded and getting them loans would become almost 100% automated and risk-free. And indeed, one of our colleagues, whose name is Riaz, he runs such a company. It's called Extra Cab. His brand name is Bridge to Capital. And he has customers all over India. He does all the underwriting digitally. He provides a loan digitally. He collects digitally. Nobody goes physically. So all this is today already happening. But what I'm saying is this needs to be universalized. Next. And just one last example. This is my bugbear. I think there are lots of assets lying with households, with communities. For example, second-hand computers are lying with households. There are out-of-work teachers, who can't start schools or tuition centers, but they are willing to do tuitions from their home. Now, if these second-hand computers could be matched with these teachers, you could have lakhs of teachers going back into, at least some self-employment as tutors, with small groups and so forth. Now, this could entirely be done using an OLX type of app. Of course, it would have to be dedicated for this purpose. But what I'm saying is that the digital world is full of so much variety and so much experimentation that if this can be taken systematically, we have the answers to plug the small holes in our big systems and bring it to the service of our crores of citizens.
Fantastic. In fact, Riaz is in the audience. I think Aniket
is he?
from Haridwar
Okay, great.
must be there.
Yeah.
So, a lot of entrepreneurs and the new age, force that is looking forward to these opportunities. I think that way, COVID has opened up new way of thinking, new opportunities. All these startups now have more room to cover. So I'll just take a quick pause here, and let's give an opportunity to the audience to ask some questions for next 5-7 minutes, 10 minutes. Maybe we'll try to capture some of. So Anish, you have any questions gathered that you want to?
Yes, sir. Yes, absolutely. So we have almost around 1,600 people listening to us on both the platforms, sir. So that's a huge number of questions. We picked a few
Once
questions for you.
more, the power of the digital world.
Indeed. We would not have discovered this platform, probably this
Yes.
strength, had COVID not happened. So there is
Yes.
a positives as well. Yeah, Anish, go ahead with some questions.
So one question is, sir, do you think the agriculture sector will face major setbacks because of supply side issues in the past 4 to 5 months? Or will it be the sector to signal the resurgence of the Indian economy?
Sorry.
I'll just...
Yeah.
Can you repeat?
So the question is, do you think the agriculture sector will face major setbacks because of the supply side issues in the last 4 to 5 months? Or will it be the sector to signal the resurgence of Indian economy from the COVID crisis?
Well, I clearly said that it did not actually have a supply side setback. I mean, there were a few problems with seeds, for example, for Kharif sowing, and but the bulk supplies, on the incoming side, mainly fertilizers, and on the outgoing side, the food grains, they moved. If you see the numbers, they moved. So, and now the micro supply chains. By the way, almost nobody in any part of the country has complained that they couldn't get vegetables, even in the midst of lockdown. So it's not just the large PDS system that has worked for agriculture, but the informal, the mandi, the rediwala, that system has also worked throughout. So I am very confident that this is one of the few times when rural India is going to lead the resurgence. Of course, I hope very much that urban India will catch up, and by Diwali, both will be running fast.
Right. So I'll just move on to the next question for you, sir. So there are lots of people who are asking, the Manrega MGNREGS is a program which is being banked upon time and again in every time there's a crisis. So the question goes like this: Do you think programs like Manrega can be a cushion against economic crisis time and again?
Well,
do we dwell on them?
If you're asking me, should Manrega be a long-term solution for the Indian economy? No. It has to be an intermediate solution. And in the way that I am advocating the use of Manrega is not to dig holes and fill them up, but to dig holes and fill them up with water, not with earth. And use the earth that is dug up to make, culverts, make farm bunds, to make rural roads and all of that, or if it's topsoil, to spread it around the farm. And if we do that, the productivity of rural India will dramatically increase. The risk levels due to drought will dramatically go down. The overall environment will research. So it's a fantastic investment. But if 15 years from now, every year we're saying, okay, 7 crore, 10 crore people have to do rural Manrega work, then we would have failed. So what I'm saying is, do this. This is the best year to do it. And the next year, maybe. In 2 years, let us drought-proof 50 million hectares of rain-fed India. Once for all. Let that be COVID's gift to India. And once we do that, imagine what will it do to India's agriculture productivity. We'll get the second green revolution,
Right. So taking you from there, actually, this is more of, how external influences on development. So basically, while rebuilding livelihoods to create employment opportunities in rural India, how do you see the challenges of social stigma, mental health, domestic violence, things like these affecting the growth in coming days?
Yeah, so these are very important issues. And, in our enthusiasm for digital this and digital that and financial this and financial that, we should not forget that it's ultimately a human story, But even in these, it's interesting that there is, the availability of digital support is partially helpful, whether it's the child line, 1098 child line, or whether it is, large number of call centers against domestic violence, whether it is WhatsApp groups created by, vulnerable people to support each other, all kinds of things. And of course, there are a lot of people I know who are providing counseling help, digitally. But, in my sort of enthusiasm or advocacy for digital, please, I also want to state that I am deeply aware of the limitations of digital, and what I always prefer is what I call digi-touch. That is digital as well as there's a touch. The touch is proximal, the touch is human. So it's a combination. So for example, the ASHA workers, there are almost a million ASHA workers, the accredited social health activists in India. They've done a fantastic job of maintaining the basic health services in rural areas. Now, if the ASHA workers are digitally empowered, as indeed we saw in Kerala, they have played a very important role in the containment of the COVID pandemic. Vietnam is another example where there's, 100 million people. There's been zero COVID death and only about 400 COVID cases. That's because Vietnam, from the time of, North and South Vietnam days, had a strong tradition of village level public workers. And that has been maintained, so we have both the strengths. We need to combine the two and get it into a touch mode, not digital.
William, let me ask one last question.
Yeah.
Now, people call you Bhishma Pitama of financial inclusion or microfinance per se. There are quite a few questions that are coming from the fact that what do you see the future look like in a space like microfinance, where I know the business, this whole model started a while ago. You came in, you also started a new story in India. What is the future that you see?
So the future is bright, but we must remember that the overarching goal of microfinance was to enhance access to the whole range of financial services to a large number of the underserved population. And by a whole range of financial services, let's just focus on 4, savings, credit, insurance, and money transfers, remittances and so on, including bank, government payments. So if these 4 are universally available from the mobile phone of every adult, the question is how that is done. That method, as you know, in the BASIX group itself, we first started with a Section 25 company. Then we did a non-bank finance company, which took credit risk on its own balance sheet. Today, BASIX group is doing it through the Sub-K business correspondent model, where there is some risk sharing, but most of it sits on the bank's balance sheet. And then in the meantime, banks themselves have gone into direct microfinance. There is also no new generation, bond digital microfinance. So I think the only advice I would say to microfinance walas is, please do not fall in love with the shirt that you're wearing today, because it will get sweaty and dirty. You must learn to take it off and wear another shirt, which means that the legal forms, that the organizational forms, the methods, we're still doing group lending in microfinance, which was invented by Professor Yunus in 1976 for a completely different context. So nakhal ke liye bhi akal chahiye, So we need to be innovative, and also the new generation of users. As I said, half of Indians are now below the age of 30, and at least half of those half are digitally literate. So they are not going to come for these, Tuesday morning 8 o'clock meeting and stuff like that. We need to change the whole architecture of how microfinance is delivered. And if we do that, then remember that the per capita income of India is bound to go up. If it's going to go up, then per capita borrowings will also go up, per capita savings will also go up, per capita remittances will also go up, and the need for per capita insurance will also go up. So you're in a huge growth sector. There's no doubt in my mind that if we keep the architecture right, if we keep our intentions right, there is lots and lots of future for what is called the microfinance sector. But don't think of it as the old MFIs doing the group meetings and giving 10,000 rupee loans. That's all part of the past.
On that note, it does still sound quite hopeful in my sense. It's basically a call of action to think fresh, and probably COVID environment anyways challenging us from already conducting these group meetings and all the social distancing issues. So I think that is sort of urging a lot of us to think twice about how we conduct this business and stay strong. So on that note, VM, I think It's been fantastic. This is a blockbuster.
I want to crack my last PJ, Shashi.
Sure.
PJ from Vijay, as they say.
Go ahead.
So, the way to get out of COVID is to turn social distancing on its head. So since a lot of you are techies and familiar with the digital world, convert social distancing into distant socializing, which means start providing your services using the tele mode, the digital mode, and then we are into a great future. Thank you.
Great. That's really fantastic. Thank you, VM. This has been a blockbuster show. Very few webinars I've seen people joining in thousands. I'm sure this has been so useful for everyone. I learned a lot in this last 45, 50 minutes. Thank you. Thank you again. And we'll call you back again for some more such gyan that we all need once in a while. So with that, we will wrap up, and with the last final announcement. So we'll, as we said, this is a series. We'll continue to have such high profile, but at the same time, grounded personalities who will come and bring more information to us and challenge us. So next 2 weeks from now, 24th of July, we have Vineet Rai coming and speaking to us on where the money is going to come from. He's been an impact investor, very, very successful story as a social entrepreneur. So we requested him to come and share his views on what post-COVID impact investing world might look like. So stay tuned for further information on that. With that, I would call it off for now. These are the social handles that you can log in and get more information. Even the recording of this particular event will also be posted on these sites. Thank you again, VM. This has been a pleasure and fantastic evening. Being a a weekend, I think so many people did take interest. That does show that there's a lot of energy still out there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shashi. Bye-bye.